Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining me again today. And it's amazing how people come into your path and how people end up on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And people go, how do you have the people on that you have on? This lovely lady, Steffanie Peterson, her brother is one of my dear friends. We used to work together years ago in the food business. Yeah, I know you can tell I was in the food business for a while. And so, but she has an incredible story. We're going to have her brother on to tell his story of what he's overcome and in his life in the last several years. But I wanted to bring Steffanie on to tell her story. And so this morning from New York City, and if you're watching this on video with a background of Central Park in the background, I want to welcome Steffanie Peterson to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Steffanie, how are you today?
Hey, Brian, I'm great. Thank you so much. Such an honor to be here with you all these miles away from my sweet home.
Well, again, it is what it is. And anytime you can connect with the great state of West Virginia, it's like having a warm biscuit in your hand.
A Tudor's biscuit.
Yes. We have. See, I need to contact my friend Ray Burke and have him sponsor the Intentional Encourager podcast for all the times we have mentioned Tudor's Biscuit World on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Yet.
I'm telling you, it's an everyday thing when we visit home. You cannot go through West Virginia and not have Tudor's every chance you get.
Well, you're from the Charleston area, and so you got to throw Susie's in there. That's a biscuit staple. Yeah, you got to get a pepperoni roll and shameless plug for some other friends of mine, the Cold Spot. Definitely would recommend you going there to eat.
Yep.
The Smetty family are friends of mine.
You got to have a little bit of heaven cupcake.
A little bit of heaven cupcake. Yeah. Why are we even doing a podcast? Let's just talk about food for 45 minutes.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Steffanie, I want to, before we dive into your story, you mentioned being a transplanted West Virginian and being in New York City. So we're hearing a lot of things back here of what's going on there. Give us an up-to-date report on what you guys have kind of gone through this year and what's the state of things like in New York City right now as we talk and record this podcast in early December.
Oh my gosh. It's been a tough year. I won't lie. March and April were ugly. I mean, it was apocalyptic in a lot of ways. People come to New York because of the hustle and the bustle and the energy, and there were empty streets, restaurants closed. My daughter obviously is in the Broadway industry, and I mean, her whole world shut down.
See, that would have been the time I would have wanted to go just to avoid the crowds. Be like, I can walk around in New York. Hey, New York.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People stayed in. The subways for the first time in history shut down at night so they could clean them every night. We lost a lot of friends from here. We had a lot of friends who came and left. Like, they couldn't survive here because there was no jobs. All of these performers, their jobs are restaurants and retail and that kind of stuff. And they had to go. They just had to pack it up and go. And so, grocery lines were, in fact, 3 and 4 hours long. I would stand in line 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 blocks just to get into a grocery store. People were very sick. I mean, it's very chilling when you turn on the news and it's a meat truck and they're carrying the deceased out of hospitals. Wow. It was scary. People ask me, "Are you coming home?" I'm like, "No, we're good. Like, we've got our apartment." And then we got sick, and we were very sick for 14 or 15 days. Like, barely could get out of bed sick. But New Yorkers bounce back. The city is awakening safely. Still very quiet. Still a lot of things happening. Governor Cuomo is our resident hero. Political views aside, he's a true New Yorker, and he jumped in with all he had. It is.
Well, at least you had him instead of Big Jimmy. We were stuck with Big Jimmy. So, you have, well, here's the thing. Okay. So, and again, I'll refer back to Michelle's West Virginia roots. Okay. You have Andrew Cuomo, nice suit, very
Yep.
polished, things like that. And then you have Big Jimmy just rolls in and whatever he could find in the closet that day just was like,
Wrinkled.
well, I think this will fit today. Let me put this on. You know, it's like night and day. And it's and watching a Jim Justice press conference when you do this with a mask and you go, takes this long to put it on, and then it takes this long, you know, and you can cover your, you know, that we have now referred to that as the Justice technique of mask wearing, where you just throw it over your eyes to eat something real quick. But
yeah,
Steffanie,
my favorite is All the King's Horses and All the King's Men. I got to tell you, every single time I watch that podcast, All the King's Horses and All the King's Men, and I'm like, really? Is this all we got, Jim?
Yep.
So,
well, you know, that's all we that's all we got. Bless his heart. Yeah.
Bless his heart.
Steffanie, you know, take me through your own personal COVID experience, because I think a lot of people, whether you had full-blown COVID, as many people did, and as you and your daughter did, I think I had a touch of COVID. I was, you know, I had a headache for a couple of days and was just kind of lethargic. I felt like it kind of brushed by me, and we have people, and again, people are testing positive that are asymptomatic.
Yeah.
You know, they don't really feel any symptoms, but they're testing positive with the antibodies.
Yeah.
Had you ever been sick like that before? What was that experience like for that 14 or 15 days where you and your daughter were battling it?
Never. It was the sickest I've ever been in my life. So we basically March 16th, we shut our office down and said, go home until we know what's happening. And so we locked the doors and went home. And about a week later, I got a horrendous headache. I suffer from migraines anyway, once or twice a month, but I got the mother of all headaches. Like, it was scary. And about 7 days later, I woke up and I couldn't taste, and I started coughing, and I immediately called my doctor, and I'm like, what do I do? And she's like, well, first of all, you can't get to a testing facility. We're talking last week of March. We're talking the apocalypse has hit. I don't have a car. We ride the subway and the bus. I don't need a car. It's just an extra expense and an extra hassle. It was a one time in living in New York. I wish I had a car.
See, for West Virginians not being able to taste, you might as well just kill us.
Well, it's that way up here too. West Virginia's transplanted. We really want to taste too.
You might as well kill us, because if we can't taste what we're eating at that point, it's just wasting time.
It's pointless. Yeah, yes. Exactly. So it
not that we won't eat. Not that we won't eat. I mean, we'll still eat, but it's just, you know, kind of pointless.
Nicer to taste. Yeah. I mean, it hit fast. It was ferocious. My symptoms were drastically different than Hannah Jane's. Hannah Jane had the gastro stuff. Yep. I had the traditional on my back flu, cough. I think I cracked a rib coughing. I went through weeks and weeks of sore ribs. Fevers were crazy, 103, 104, and I couldn't get out. And my doctor's like, I don't want you to go get tested because I know the answer. You've lost your sense of taste. Your fever's on. I can see you. We FaceTimed every day or so. She's like, I do not want you to leave your house. The dangers of you leaving your house right now are greater than whether or not we stick a swab up your nose and confirm what we already know. And so, and you really couldn't get to tests then. They weren't around.
How did you and your daughter medicate? Because, most people would, how I would treat flu is, continue to pump aspirin and get the fever down.
Yeah.
And then start, with some antibiotics attacking the other things. But with this, you just mentioned grocery store lines. Outrageous. Yeah. I can imagine pharmacy lines were even more outrageous. Yeah. How do you treat what you're dealing with, or do you just have to say this thing's got to run its course?
It just had to run its course. We did. I did have a friend, actually wanted to, we talk about humanity. When I first, kind of a sidetrack, but related, when I first moved to New York, people would say, oh, I lived through Sandy. Oh, I lived through 9/11. And I'm like, it's weird. I want to feel that connective tissue that New Yorkers have when things like this happen. And we got sick and we called. It was actually Hannah's first voice coach, Christy Cates, who's a dear, dear friend of our family now. And she said, I'll get groceries. I kid you not, 5 hours later, a stranger who she had never met, who was a friend of her friend, showed up at my doorstep with groceries. The man stood in line for 3 hours and waited for groceries for somebody he didn't even know. So he brought Tylenol. We did bone broth because I don't know how healthy you are, but bone broth is good for you. Mucinex, and we just kind of waited it
We've
out.
talked about Tudor's biscuits for 5 minutes. How healthy do you think I am?
But you know what I did get?
What's that?
That amazing, wonderful brother of mine sent me pepperoni rolls when I had COVID.
There was your healing right there. That's how you recovered. Yes, because and Steffanie, I'll say this. You're talking about March in the apocalypse there in New York.
Yeah.
We were still not feeling it yet in West Virginia because I had friends of mine. I have a friend of mine in Louisiana that texted me and said, we're coming to West Virginia because you guys are COVID free up there, And I said, well, come on, we've got a place to stay. We didn't feel it because you could put the state population of West Virginia into a borough in New York City.
Oh, a neighborhood of a borough.
Yeah, a neighborhood of a borough.
A neighborhood of a borough. Yeah.
When did you know? When was it that you knew that you were on the backside of this thing? You did bone broth, you Tylenol, antibiotics, things like that. At what point during that 15 days did you start to feel some relief?
Day 13. Honestly, I mean, it was 10 days of just doing nothing. Like, it was hell. I hate to say it, but there was one night, and this is both embarrassing, but you can't tell my story and not tell it. There was one night I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't get back to my bed, so I just rolled off and laid in the bathroom floor because I had absolutely no energy. Last Christmas, I got a weighted blanket for Christmas, asked for it. I'm an anxious sleeper. And I went to get in bed the second night when it really had just totally knocked me out. I didn't have the energy to put my blanket on because my little 15-pound weighted blanket was just too heavy. And Hannah and I laid into my bed, and first we laughed, and then we cried, and then we were like, I mean, really? I can't even put my blanket on because I have no energy at all. We have good blanket warmers, though, because we have 3 cats. And for the better part of that 10, 15 days, they just didn't leave our side. So my doctor was amazing. Telehealth is revolutionized and saved me. I talk to her every other day or so. My family and friends, we got care packages. But the best part is that, Amazon was trying to everybody was figuring it out. Like, this was when nobody knew anything. Yeah. Like, grocery stores didn't know what social distancing meant. Amazon was going berserk because everybody was ordering groceries. Like, we do that normally. And I'm thinking, I always get my groceries every week through Amazon. Why can't I get my groceries? Well, that's because the rest of the world suddenly didn't want to leave their house either. But I remember calling home and talking to David probably every day, more than once a day, because he was, love his heart, he was worried. And it encouraged me to know that somebody cared. And he would say, we had 1 case. We had 3 cases. And I turned my TV on and it would say 2,000 new cases, 2,000 deaths. I mean, it was so dramatically different that it was almost astonishing at times how the different worlds that we were living in 8 hours apart.
Here's the
apocalyptic.
And Steffanie, here's the thing too. Even if people wanted to get to you from West Virginia, let's say David and his boys and his daughter loaded up the van and said, okay, we're coming with reinforcements. It still would have been hard for them to get to you, even though people were not out and about in the city.
Yeah.
It would have still been hard for them to get to you because of what New York was dealing with now. What do you think will be the biggest lesson that New York takes away from what they went through with COVID-19? Because you mentioned 9/11.
Yeah.
That was devastating.
Devastating.
You mentioned Hurricane Sandy. So now you have a terrorist attack, you have a natural disaster, and a global pandemic, all within a 20-year span. What do you think New York will take away from COVID-19?
I think one of the things that Governor Cuomo did well, and New Yorkers followed, for the most part, I mean, New Yorkers sheltered. When the hammer came down, say what you will about the big city, the melting pot, say what you will about New Yorkers, being rude or fast or whatever you want to call it. We buckled down and listened. And I think people will look back and remember that the time that the city that never sleeps actually slept. But we did it well. I think that New York should be proud of the way that we handled this. I think that they should be proud of Cuomo. I think that there were many times that he opposed the federal government. because they didn't understand, because they weren't here. They weren't living it. They were seeing it behind the lens of a camera. They were seeing what the media was reporting. But I think the takeaway is, when we hunker down, New Yorkers will bounce back.
Well, and again, what you just hit on is the chaos of the unknown.
Yes.
And what I have said throughout this is that good decisions are never made when fear is the impetus for making the decision. You've got to be measured. You've got to be, even in the midst of chaos, you have to be measured. You have to be reasoned.
Yeah.
You have to understand what the situation is and how to react to it.
Yep.
And could our government have done so? Absolutely. I think our government could have done a lot of things differently. Again, I'll say this, and we'll pivot to other things. But the thing that I find fascinating about this is that you can't get many experts to agree on this virus, on how to treat it, how to move forward with it. And this has been we have a handle on most every other virus, including AIDS, by the way. Yeah. We have a handle on AIDS. AIDS was our COVID-19 30 years ago.
Correct.
35 years ago, it was a pandemic like COVID-19 was. Now we have a handle on it. This situation was we had no handle on it, and we couldn't get agreement from any. And Steffanie, I'll say this. In our state, the thing that I have been most disappointed with is we have a coronavirus czar. We have a corona czar here in West Virginia. Go figure.
Yes.
And you can't get him to tell you how many cases he's actively treated or what his treatment protocol was. And any good doctor, any great physician will tell you, when I attack this disease, this is what I attack it with, and I have success this many % of the time attacking it in this way. Yeah. We didn't get that here in West Virginia. So I commend you guys in New York for doing that, because we're still searching for those answers here in West Virginia.
Yeah. And Cuomo wasn't quiet. Cuomo was never quiet. He was out front of it. You know, say what you will about people are like, oh, I don't like his politics. You don't have to like his politics to appreciate and respect what he did for this. You know, we were at such a disadvantage because all the other states have learned from us. We were like the petri dish. Like, no one had a clue what to do, and all of a sudden New York is ravaged with this virus. And so we kind of had to just punt. We had to just figure it out as you go.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's the difference in the way Jim Justice, our governor, handled it, and the way Andrew Cuomo handled it, and other governors like him.
Yeah.
Our governor would speak and say nothing.
Yeah.
Our governor would speak just to speak. And he said something the other day, and we'll move on, but I think it's important to this conversation about what you say, and the power of what you say really matters.
Yes.
He said that there are people that have passed away from COVID that are crying from the grave. Mm-hmm. And if you have a loved one that has passed away from COVID in West Virginia, you don't want Governor Justice speaking for you.
No, not at all.
My family was affected by COVID-19 in that situation. We lost my wife's 98-year-old grandfather.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Gosh.
And when you're 98, I mean, good grief, everything's a bonus. But
something, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't want Jim Justice speaking for me and my family and saying, well, they're crying from the grave. No. And again, you do more harm when you just speak to speak and not speak to say something. And so that's where I want to transition to with you for just a minute. The reason that you came to New York.
Yes.
So now, how are people in the Broadway industry that stayed, like your daughter, how are they coming back themselves? How are they starting to get back to some semblance of normalcy? And what did they have to do? Those that did stay, what did they end up doing for incomes and careers and things like that?
Yeah, it's been tough. You know, Hannah and I talk a lot about how fortunate it is that she's 20, just almost 20 years old and still lives at home. Because I tell her, if I wasn't here, you would have had to pack your bags and go. Very dear friend of ours from the Broadway community, very early on, said to me, what people don't understand is that we didn't just lose our jobs. We lost our life, because these people work together, they play together, their hobbies are together, they have abnormal work hours, they're doing 8 shows a week, and so they work at odd hours. They lost everything, and they
Well,
went
it's
from
like college
happiness to
athlete.
nothing.
Yeah, it's like college. I didn't mean to jump in there. It's like college athletes when conferences decided, okay, we're not going to play football.
Yeah.
Like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 decided, and then they decided to play. Well, to your point, those young people are on a regimented schedule. The people, no matter how old you are as a Broadway performer, whether you're a relatively new performer or you're a seasoned performer, you get on a regimented schedule. So for Hannah, your daughter, what were some of the things that she had to do to really transition her mindset to continue to say, okay, this will be over at some point, but we don't know when. I've got to continue to do things to move my career forward.
Yeah, we the first part, I mean, she was sick for a bit. I think everybody took a little bit of a hiatus for the first couple months in the community, because everyone kept thinking, oh, it's just going to be a short-lived thing and we're all going to get back to work. Never had Broadway been closed down for this long. Hannah, like many people we've talked to, it took a bit for her to bounce back into it. After we were sick, the first month or so, she did some lives on Instagram, got her guitar out, sat in her bedroom, put her ring light on, and took some requests and that kind of stuff. But then the longevity of this started to sink in. And suddenly we were watching feeds and we were seeing all of our performer friends doing at-home concerts. So these people went from standing in front of a camera to being responsible for standing in front of the camera and running a camera and lighting and sound. And how do I put together something that I can give to the world that puts, that isn't something that somebody else produced. I'm not, she is, thankfully. Younger people fared much better, I will tell you, because, they come in the Instagram world and they've been doing this for a long time.
Steffanie, I didn't realize that the two most important things in West Virginia that would be the hardest to find in June were toilet paper and webcams.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, really, webcams were like gold. I needed a webcam for the podcast, and they were hard to find. So when she kind of figures it out to continue to do the live stuff and play music and things like that, she's getting toward recovery. How have the last few months been in trying to transition? Does Broadway have any idea when they will come back to some capacity?
At this point, I mean, the last thing that, was out there public was May, which probably means more like September. You got to give them a chance to get back in the rehearsal rooms and rehearse and get something ready. We have friends who work for the theater companies, and we have friends who work, we have musicians and dressers and all, Broadway is, and this is something I want people to hear, because people think Broadway and they think Hannah Jane can't stand on a stage and sing. And, when her day comes and she finally gets to make her moment on Broadway, it's going to be amazing. But behind every person on that stage is someone putting costumes together. Someone's doing hair, makeup. Someone's building props and sets and a sound guy and an orchestra. And then someone's running the front of the house and someone's running the back of the house. And the guy down the street has the bar that the performers go to eat dinner after. So this isn't just people on the stage. This is like an onion. What is it? Shrek says ogres are like onions. They have layers.
Yes.
This community is like an onion. You just keep peeling and peeling back.
And that's amazing that, and I'm glad you said that. And here's what I would like to see, if it can be done. I would like to see, because in some places in our country, they're allowing fans to go back to football games at limited capacity. In Huntington, where we live, Marshall has had games, 12, 13,000 people in a 36,000 seat stadium. I would love to see, when the Jets and Giants are done playing, that maybe there could be some Broadway shows put on. And I'm sure it can be done. The Jets and Giants playing a 65, 70,000 seat stadium, where maybe you could do some Broadway performances outdoors. I don't know if that can be done, But it would bring back some semblance of normalcy in that situation. It would be, I think it would be neat for those people to be able to go, I'm going to go see a Broadway play. I'm just going to go see it at a football stadium.
Yeah. I think that as we scroll through the feed and as this has gone on further and further, Hannah has now done 3 solo concerts. We've learned lighting and sound. The last one was a pretty big one. We actually had a full band with us. All the guys were socially distanced and all that stuff. But you're seeing a lot of Broadway casts come together and do Zoom performances. So you see 10 little boxes. I think the challenge is that singing is dangerous if you're thinking about COVID, because you're automatically putting aerosol back out into the world when you open your mouth. And so there's 2 sides of it. One is keeping the performers safe, but the other side of it is keeping the audience safe, because Broadway theaters are old, they're small, and they're tightly compacted.
Yeah. And that's why I was thinking about the football stadium, because if you put the performers, if you socially distance the performers on stage, or they wore a mask or some kind of face protection, something like that, the audience in the stands gets nowhere near the performers on the stage. If you can do it for the Super Bowl halftime show, which they've done it every year pre-pandemic, I mean, surely to goodness that, some of the shows would be able to do that. And again, you have the only thing that would hamper that would obviously be weather. If it snowed or something. I don't know. Maybe that would add to the ambiance of the Broadway show. Who knows? But
I think the other part of this that's different from mainstream music is that, Broadway performers are telling you a story. And the further back you get from them, you disconnect from their facial expressions and the things that make them storytellers. And so I think it gets, the bigger the stadium, the bigger the theater, the harder it is to experience that intimacy of live. One of the, I don't know what to call it, it's a part of this community is, the cabaret scene. And these are smaller houses that seat 80 to 100 people. And it's very special in there because you feel like the person is singing just directly to you. And so, you see a lot of cabaret performers have really been able to kind of keep their careers rolling. Hannah being part of that community as well, by doing these performances in their living rooms or, on their balconies or whatever. But, Broadway is a special place. My kid has dreamed about it since she was 9 years old and was Annie at the Alban Theater in St. Albans and walked off the stage and said, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I looked at her and I said, you're crazy. You're going to go to school and be a doctor or a nurse. And here I am in New York City, 10 years later, and she's, fighting her way back into it. But it's 90,000 people in New York City alone have been impacted. There was a statistic on the New York Times the other day that 90,000 people have lost everything. They've lost their jobs. We have a lot of friends who have, gone to stay with parents and hopefully will come back. But I don't know that Broadway can come back any other way than in their intimate spaces and have it be what it is. So, every day is a journey. Every day is here we go. Hannah's been very fortunate. I will tell you that she has been blessed abundantly with people in the industry who have been in a lot longer than her that have offered her opportunities to sing. She was Scott Barbarino, who owns Ellen's Stardust Diner, and any tourist who's been to New York City has been to Ellen's, does something called Piano Bar Live. And so she was on his show one night. The New York City Cabaret Convention, which happens at Rose Hall at the Lincoln Center, she was set to make her second appearance this year, got canceled. They recorded the whole thing. And so she went into the Iridium, which is a cabaret club in the city, and recorded her songs. And they went out as part of the video for the convention. There have been several people who have called and said, I want to put you on my online show. And most recently, I can't do this and not plug this, both of her original cabaret shows have been nominated for Broadway World Awards. And so if you are a fan, go to my Facebook page. There's links all over the place. It is a fan award. And so votes matter. But, to be 19 years old and have your only 2 shows be nominated by who knows who, we don't know who did it, is pretty amazing in the midst of this pandemic. And so these, in the Broadway world, their platform has really done a great job throughout all of this of highlighting performers who are stuck at home, highlighting shows. Hannah, bless her heart, was interviewed by a good friend of ours, Stephen Mosier, and he's just been a delight. He's doing something called At Home With, and then he just highlights another performer. And so we've also gotten to know these performers at an intimate level. We know what people's dog looks like and what their cats' names are. And, what their family is like. So it's hard, but I will tell you, there have been some really magical things that have come out of this situation for this particular community. And it's a beautiful thing, but they're dying to get back.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. I want to tell you about our sponsor, SEO National. SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. Now, what's that, you might say? Well, search engine optimization helps you show up higher on search engines in front of paying customers for words that you as a business owner can monetize. What a great concept. SEO National is owned by my good buddy Damon Burton, who's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Not only has Damon and his team worked with businesses of all sizes, from e-commerce startups to NBA teams and Shark Tank featured businesses, but more importantly, Damon and his team are about transparency, trust, and providing lifetime value. So much so that he still has his first customers after opening SEO National 14 years ago. Let me give you some intentional encouragement and call Damon and his team today at 855-736-6285 or go to www.seonational.com and get a free quote. Wow. In the limited time that we have left, I would be remiss if we didn't walk through your story. And that's the reason I wanted to have you on, because I know a little bit through your brother, but I want to hear it from your lens and from your perspective and share it with the audience. So take me as far back as you want to take me, from point A to wherever, and, tell your story of your life and what you've gone through yourself.
Goodness gracious. I don't even know where to start. I'll start with Hannah. I've been a single mom since she was about a year old. And we've had good times and bads, but she pretty early on was a singer. Not something I realized till she was about 5 years old. She walked in my kitchen and sang a Carrie Underwood song about cheating and lying and beating up her boyfriend's car with a slugger. That's how that was the day. And I always thought it was something fun. I was like, great, she's got a pretty little voice. This is fun. And I had a friend who said she ought to audition for the Appalachian Children's Choir to be fun for her. And she did, and she made it and loved it. Very young age. About 9 years old, this kid and I had just been a rough couple seasons for us. My mom had been sick. Being a single mom is not an easy thing, and working full time. And I have a great job and a great career that I love. And so I put a lot of time and effort into it. But we said, let's just audition. The Albin Theater is doing Annie. This would be a fun summer project. They had not done, this was their first show. And she said, okay, mommy, this will be fun. Let's try, hoping to be an orphan. That was our goal. Let's just be an orphan. And they cast her as Annie. So I panicked. I'm like, she's 9 years old. What are you doing? And the guy, when Adam Bryan called and offered it, he said, we want to offer her Annie. And I said, are you sure you called the right person? Because I wasn't convinced. And it started, that's the avalanche. And we always say it's Adam's fault. It's the avalanche that started the most amazing, magical, blessed, adventurous journey that I could have ever asked for in life. Nothing I ever planned, nothing I ever thought would happen. But she came off the stage the first night and said, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I thought,
you had no intention of ever leaving Charleston, right? You would have been content to be there the rest of your life.
I lived in Chicago for 13 years, so I had already had the big city experience. And if I had to stay there, it was fine. I had a community. I had a church family I loved. I had friends. She had her community. Like, it was not on our radar. As a matter of fact, right after Annie at the Albin, the Guild did Annie, the Light Opera Guild with Nina Pastetti, and she was cast as one of the lead orphans. And I remember talking to a mom about another family that was like moving to New York. And I'm like, that is the craziest thing I have ever heard. Who in the world would pick up and move their kid to New York City at 10 years old? Well, sometimes we eat crow.
I like people moving to West Virginia. Like, why in the world would you come here?
Actually, West Virginia is special. I'll tell you, if I could transplant about 50 of them to New York, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
There you go.
I'd have my people back. So we went through this theater thing. Like, she auditioned for everything. She would get cast. She had great roles. And I don't know how much you know about this industry, but there are bad people who come through small towns and they want to make your kid famous. And they say, come and audition for me. Give me $1,000 or $5,000. And they're scammers, and they're preying on innocent people. But we decided early on that we were going to use these people to our advantage. So we would go just because it was a chance for her to stand in front of a stranger. She liked it, gave her experience. I still didn't think she would do this for the rest of her life, but I figured that she would spend, some point of her world was going to be tied up in music. When we realized that she could play instruments, and then she started writing. By the way, she has a Christmas song out, Milk and Cookies. You can get it on Amazon and iTunes right now. So
we love shameless plugs here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Sorry, guys.
We love shameless plugs. No, it's all good. Listen,
proud mom.
Listen, I don't blame people one bit, and it's part of the reason we have people on is they can plug things. Hey, it's all good. We have no boundaries here. So, Milk and Cookies, you can find it on Amazon.
You can, and it's actually funny. You'll enjoy it. If you have kids, they'll think it's funny. And so we went and we met these people, and I went home that night. And I remember thinking something is different. I don't know what this is. Got a text message the next day as expected. We want to see you for a callback. We love your daughter. She's amazingly talented. And I'm like, I know this, but I don't have money. I'm a single mom. Like, come on. And the lady's name was Kim Myers. The organization is Arts International. And I met with Kim against my better judgment. I'm like, if I don't meet with her, I'll never close the chapter. I'll always wonder, what if I had? And we met on a Monday morning. Hannah was sick as a dog. And she said, I really want her to come to my showcase. Well, I knew what these showcases were. They were just money. Just give me your money. Give me your money. But I could not shake her. I prayed day and night. God and I had so many discussions, deep, heavy discussions about what to do. And for whatever reason, my gut kept telling me, go, 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 go. So Kim offered to help us, supported us to help get us there. We went to Florida in June, and Hannah Jane blew the doors off the stage. We met with 15 musical theater agents, and they all said, you live in the wrong city. She'll get there, but she'll get there much faster if you go to New York now. And I remember looking at her thinking, why did we do this? We're not going to New York. Who in the world? We're not. Luckily, my best friend had traveled with me, Susan, and we were sitting in the hotel in the last night, and she said to me, you're going to have to move to New York City. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not moving to New York City with a 13-year-old and 3 cats by myself. Lo and behold, we came home, and I looked at her, and I got up one morning, and God just said, you got to do this. You got to do this. I promise I'll take care of you. I can audibly hear his voice saying, I've got you. Trust me. I've got you. And so I said to her, do you want to move to New York? And she said, now? And I said, well, I need a little time. I'm probably going to take me a year. And this was in July of 14. And she came to me about a week later, and she said, Mom, do you think we could be there by Thanksgiving? I really want to watch the Thanksgiving Day parade from New York. And I looked at her and I said, are you nuts? I'm not moving in 4 months. That's crazy. 5 months later, I lived in New York City, November 11th. So a lot of things happened to get us here fast. The doctors that I worked for, residencied with a doctor here, connected me. They ended up making me an offer on the spot. It was crazy. I sold everything I owned pretty much, basically 80% of what I owned. I sold my car. I depleted my savings account, took out my 401k money, and I put everything we owned in a 10x10 truck, and I moved to New York. And so it was, looking back, I think it was dumb. It was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. Thank God that, I serve a loving God who says, it's okay, I'll clean up your mess. Because there was no reason why this should have worked. No reason in the world why 2 West Virginia hillbillies who threw caution to the wind should still be thriving in New York City like we are. So we got here. The best part of my whole story is how we got here. So in West Virginia, you just go to high school. It's just what you do. If you live in Sissonville, you go to Sissonville. You live in Barboursville, you go to Barboursville. In New York City, there are 1,500 high schools. And you pick your high school, and you either audition, if it's a performing arts high school, or you do an interview, if it's a leadership school, or if it's an engineering school, you take a test, but they're almost all specialized. And we had no clue. So we walked in the door, went to register her in her little middle school, last year middle school, and they're like, here's your book. Here's all the schools. Good luck. I said, excuse me? She said, well, you have to go pick her high school. Pick her high school? She's like, yeah, there's auditions, and I'm sorry to say you've probably missed most of the auditions. So I went back home that night, and we had been here 48 hours, and I sat in my living room and I cried. And I said, God, what did I do? What have I gotten myself into? getting here was an act of God, but now how are we going to do this? And so I literally spent 24 hours reading this book, picking out every high school, got on the subway, had no clue what I was doing, rode to every single school I could find because my kid was going to ride a subway to school at 14 years old. Long story short, we ended up picking 6 schools, turned in audition tickets, and her favorite school, we missed the musical theater audition, which was devastating to her because this was the purpose. We're going here. We're going to go to Broadway. There's no in-depth buts about it. This is our mission. And so you show up and you audition, and then you wait until March. Audition in November, and you wait until March and to hear if you got in. You get in somewhere, but it might not be your school. So one of my favorite stories, I have to tell the whole story, is the audition process. So we showed up. She walks in the school and she says, "This is my place." I'm like, "You don't even know. You've not met anybody. How is this your place?" She's like, "I just know." Walked into the audition room to sing for vocal, which is classical music because we'd missed musical theater. And the guy said, "I think you're in the wrong place." He said, "I think you should have been in the musical theater program." She's like, "Yeah, I missed the audition." And he said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I just moved here 3 days ago." And he said, "I'll see what I can do." What she didn't know is downstairs, I was having a similar conversation with the vice principal of the school who said, "Why did she miss the audition?" And in his mind, I could see his face. "Are you, is this lady going to tell me that the dog ate her audition slip or some stupid excuse?" And I said, "Well, we just moved here." And he said, "Oh, well, let's see how today goes." Fast forward 3 weeks, she gets a call back. Call back means you go to a theater and you dance. Hannah Jane is not a dancer. She was not born a dancer. Hannah Jane is a singer. So panic set in, but we knew we had to do it. So I put it in my little calendar. I am still a weirdo. I still use a paper calendar.
Me too. I'm a 48-year-old weirdo. I still use a paper planner. Yes.
Yep. I still use a paper planner. I love Staples and Office Max. They're my favorite places to shop. Yeah, weirdo. So I write it down. That's it. I'll get her out of school. We'll go to the audition. I open my planner on Tuesday, thinking the audition is on Wednesday, and realize that the audition is on Tuesday. And if there's one thing you know about New York City and the performing arts community, you either show up or you don't. And if you miss it, you're done. There are very rarely second chances. It's 11:30. The audition is at 3 o'clock. She doesn't get out of school till 2 o'clock. I'm in a panic. I call the school. I'm like, "I got to get her out. Can you send her to me?" "No, ma'am, you have to check her out." "What do you mean?" "I'm telling you, just let her go. Let her go. I'll fax a note. Let her go." They will not let her go. My boss is like, "Get out. Go get her. Go get her." So we have been in the city for no amount of time at all. I knew how to get from my house to my work and from my work back to my house. I knew one train line. And if we got on another train line, who in the heck knows where I was going, but I surely didn't. So I get on the train and it comes on and it says, "Construction on the R train. Everything's going express." I'm like, "What does that mean, express?" So long story short, I end up getting out there. I have $10 in my bank account. The train has gone express. I have no idea where I am. They will not let her out of school. I only have a train pass to get myself back in the city, and we are 45 minutes away from her being late for this audition. So she goes in and asks her science teacher, who gives her a pass. She ends up getting on the train. By the time we get into the city, we are 45 minutes late for her audition. I have now called these people 3 times and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we're late. It's my fault. I'm so sorry. It's not her fault." And they're like, "It's okay. Just get here when you can." We come up out of the subway. It is pouring the rain, Brian. Pouring the rain. We run 5 blocks. She's now bona fide an hour late. We walk in the door, and the woman opens the door and says, "Hi, y'all. You must be Hannah Jane." I stopped in my tracks, and I looked up, and I said, "You are so real. It's not even funny." And they sent us this little angel who said, "It's okay. I'm from the South. I know how this works. Did you have train trouble?" How did you know?
Did you have train trouble? That's not something you hear in West Virginia.
That's something here in West Virginia. And so they scooped us in. Hannah auditioned. Long story short, she ended up getting into the #1 performing arts school in the city. But I tell you that to tell you as an encouragement that, you know what, another reason why this shouldn't have worked. This kid should never have made it into that school. There's no reason. Any other kid, they would have said, are you crazy? Get here now. So she ended up in that school. I have changed jobs since we got here. I met a doctor through my first doctors who was working at the hospital. I managed plastic surgery offices, surgery centers, and he wanted to go into private practice. And so I spent the last 5 years building his practice on Fifth Avenue. So I'm a pretty lucky girl. In the meantime of all that, Hannah Jane has just stepped and stepped and stepped. She went from a little kid from West Virginia to suddenly somebody who's actually making her way through this industry. And it's not hard. It's hard. Everybody here is a performer. Everybody here is doing what she's doing. Everybody here is looking for their next big break. I think her first big explosion where we realized, okay, we're in the right place. She was asked to participate in a competition called Mabel Mercer. Mabel Mercer was one of the original cabaret singers. African-American lady who just sat in a chair and sang like a songbird. And Hannah's propensity to music is Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand, Rosemary Clooney. It's not pop at all. It is all that old music. As a matter of fact, we auditioned for America's Got Talent 3 times. And every time we got to the TV round, and every time they said, okay, Britney Spears, Ariana Grande. And Hannah said, no, thank you. And every time we walked away. So at some point in this process, I had to know that old music was going to pay off, and it did. But she participated in a concert and won. It was a competition for high school kids, and she won 2nd place. And the very next day, we were back at the theater watching another show, and KT Sullivan, who, if you Google KT Sullivan, is a world-renowned cabaret singer, travels the world, said to Hannah, I want you to have your own show. And Hannah said, my own show? What the heck does that mean? And so she sponsored Hannah, and Hannah had her very first solo cabaret show at the age of 17.
Wow.
And so she sold out a theater here, and she sang for an hour, and then went on to do 2 more shows. It was a crazy turn of events how it happened. But it kind of planted her in this industry as a player, as somebody who's legitimately talented and ready. And so she has spent the better part of the last 5 years just gobbling up every opportunity she can to sing. It doesn't matter where it is. Somebody's garage, somebody's roof party, as part of birthday parties, working on a website. She's taken up photography to kind of offset. And thankfully that's helped her financially during the COVID. But she just keeps taking it. And the bummy part about COVID is that she was 19, just turned 19, which is kind of when the doors start to open. There's a point on Broadway where you're too big to be little, too little to be big. So she was too big to play a little kid, but she wasn't big enough to play 18, 19, 20-year-old roles. And so she had things brewing, and then bam, her world shut down. So I would say about 18 months ago, I kept a journal the whole time. The whole time we did this, I kept a journal because I knew that someday I'd want to look back at the crazy things that had happened, like the fact that we watched the first Thanksgiving Day parade from a penthouse apartment on 73rd and Park Avenue. Like, who does that? We saw Billy Joel from the 8th row 8 days after we moved here. A patient gave me tickets. How's that happen? Like this?
Yeah.
It's craziness. And I knew I'd want to go back and look. And so I had friends saying to me, you got to write a book. You've got to write a book. And I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. Are you crazy?
Yeah, everybody says, write a book. And then it's like, oh, my word, what did I get myself into?
Yeah, exactly. And so I thought, well, okay. And it was very slow at first. Like, it was more of a bona fide, glorified journal than it was really a book.
See, we when we do shameless plugs, we do shameless plugs. Hot Mess Express. I love it. Yeah, that's your book, Hot Mess Express. So you go back and journal, you go back and put your thoughts together.
Yep.
And you write the book. What was the one? Tell me real quick here, and we'll let people know how to get the book, because I really want to ask you a couple more questions. Really,
ask me. Go for it.
Beyond some of the things that you've detailed, what was another obstacle that you guys overcame, maybe either separately or together, And what was the lesson that you learned from it? Because, and I'm sure that you detail a lot of it in Hot Mess Express, but there are things in people's lives that they overcome and they go, okay, here's what I learned from it, but they don't really talk about it a whole lot. What was that? What was that for you guys?
And this is in the book in some form, but I will. This is something that's important to me to share. The world revolves around money. Just is what it is. You got to have money to live. Got to have money to eat.
That's why people should buy your book.
Yeah, exactly. Please.
Yes. We're not opposed to groveling or begging.
Exactly. I was a single mom for a long time. And so making ends meet some months was almost impossible. And I made it by the grace of friends and people who were gracious. And we still kind of live on that to a certain point. But I didn't think we would make it. I didn't think we had the money to make the move. I mean, you're talking a car pay, buying a new car is what it takes to get here and get settled and find a place to live. I had to pay 3 months rent up front, and I live in 450 square feet, and my rent is 3 times anybody's mortgage I know. People rose up in ways I never imagined. Before we left, people would call me and say, "Hey, can we hug you?" Sure. And I would leave, and there was a $100 bill in my back pocket.
Wow.
Or a card would show up with $50 in it. So it was remarkable. But getting here and learning to live in a city where everything is 55 million times more than what you're used to, on a very, granted, pay is a little more here, but learning to trust your instincts, learning to budget in a way that was beyond. And I was a good budgeter. I really was. But I really had to kind of step back and realize that was a whole part of life that I had to learn. I had to figure out how to make it. But what I learned from putting it out there is that people want to help. People want to see you succeed. Whether it's me, whether it's Hannah, whether it's you, people want to help bridge the gap where they can. And it humbled me in a lot of ways to realize that, I can't do this on my own. I can't. I'm not capable of it. And God never intended for me to do it on my own either. He never intended for me to be a solo singer. He intended for me to have a band. But that has seriously been the single most difficult challenge we've had to overcome, is figuring out why milk is $4 a gallon here and $2 there. Or, the first time we went out, we lived here about 3 months, and I had been squabbling away money to take us out to dinner, because I thought that's going to be a couple months. It'll be a nice little congratulations. You've survived your first 2 months in New York.
Yeah.
And we walked by this place by the train station, and there was actually a pink car that came out of the top of it. And it was a Spanish place, and it always smelled so good. And I said, "Where do you want to go?" And she's like, "Let's go to the pink car place." I'm like, "It's a great idea."
Yeah.
So we get in there, we sit down. We are West Virginians. We're not bilingual on any planet that we live on. Everything is in Spanish, including the menu. Now, Hannah has had a little Spanish in school, and she's looking at it, and I'm like, "What do you think? Should we leave?" She's like, "No, let's just take a chance and order." So we order what we think is chicken fingers.
Mm-hmm.
We've just kind of tried to figure it out. This is it. My $50 for dinner is now gone. And she brings us a plate of pig's feet. And I looked at Hannah, and she said, "Are we going to eat them?" I'm like, "You were going to eat them," because that was it. That was our money to go. I mean, thankfully we're better now than we were when we got here. But there were moments where it was, okay, here's the grocery list. All right, we only have money for half of it. Figure it out. But it's probably my greatest accomplishment too. When I look back at this, my greatest accomplishment is that we figured it out.
Well, I love what you said there about soloists and things like that. And I talk about that in my book, is that great live performers always know how to feature the band.
Yeah.
And so, again, you realize that you don't do life by yourself. You
Nope.
can be the most talented person in the world, but you have people that help you. So leave folks today with your biggest piece of intentional encouragement. Maybe somebody has that dream that they want to pursue, or, maybe they've got a child that, like you, has a gift and they're really just kind of searching. What's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement, Steffanie?
Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to jump. The whole reason I wrote the book was so that somebody out there somewhere, if one person reads my book and jumps at something, whether it's performing, whether it's sports, whatever it's hosting a podcast, writing their own book, don't be afraid to fail. Success isn't trying. The success is just putting yourself out there. Who cares what happens to it? And not that I don't lose sleep at night counting books that I've sold, because I do, just ask my publisher. But you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid, because 2 little girls, hillbillies from West Virginia, are living and thriving in New York City. And, she's steps away, hopefully, from landing herself on Broadway and seeing her dreams. I'm doing a job that I love, that brings me great fulfillment every day, because I was courageous, although I call it crazy.
See, for the first time in your life, when you go to New York, you have to put shoes on because all West Virginians we don't wear shoes, right? Yeah, I mean,
people on the subway, though, are weird. People on the subway, sometimes offline, I'll tell you my subway shoe story. People take their shoes off on the subway way more than they should.
Wow. See, there are closet West Virginians everywhere.
There are closets.
Yes.
I'll tell you funny. 2 years ago, the Mountaineers led off the Thanksgiving Day parade. And there are a lot of West Virginians up here, because there was about 75 of us that found each other on a very cold Thursday morning and stood on the corner of 73rd and Central Park West and watched that parade. And it was one of the most glorious moments of living here for the past 6 years, is just being with people like me, people who came from my roots. And it was amazing. But please, if you hear nothing else, if you read the book and you get nothing else out of it, I was 40 years old when we came here. 40 years old before I started my adventure.
Wow.
Don't be afraid.
And by the way, go Herd.
Go Herd. Yeah, no.
See, I'm not a Mountaineer fan. Everybody thinks you're like, oh, you're from West Virginia, you root for the Mountaineers. No, not in this house.
I went to Marshall for my graduate degree. So I'm a herder.
There you go. Steffanie, tell people where they can get the book. Tell people where they can get the Christmas song that Hannah's recorded, or where they can get her music if they want it. Tell folks how they can connect with you guys.
So Hannah Jane and I are both on Facebook and Instagram. You're going to find her under Hannah Jane NYC. She's got a website. She has a Facebook page. We'd love it if you become a YouTube subscriber and follow her. We post every single possible thing we can. You can get her book, my book, her song. Both are on Amazon. My book is also on Google Play. It's also on Apple Books. You can download it. Hannah's Milk and Cookies is also on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all the major music platforms there. Listen, we would love to know you. If you're coming to New York, we've had strangers sleep on our floor. Now, I'm telling you, I mean, you might be sleeping on the kitchen floor in a blow-up mattress, but please look us up. Please say hello. Please let us show you our beloved city. We're sleeping right now, but we're going to wake again. And it's the greatest city in the world. And I love nothing more than to see people from my hometown come and visit and hang out with us. We will make time for you and share any part of our journey that we can. So please follow us and go to Broadway World, Cabaret Awards, and vote for my kid.
Total parent move right there. I love it. Total parent move right there. Yes, yes. Steffanie Myers Peterson. Steffanie is spelled Steffanie. Yeah. And then Myers Peterson, Peterson. You can find her on Facebook. You can get her on other platforms as my phone starts to ring. How rude of somebody to interrupt our ending of our podcast.
Exactly.
I mean, as a podcast host, I should learn to turn my phone down, the ringer down.
Hannah Jane called it about minute 2 starting our podcast, and I declined her.
Yeah, it's like, duh. Steffanie, this has been great fun. And again, I'm going to have your brother on, David Myers. He's a great friend of mine. And I'm glad he connected us and we got to tell your story. Thank you for joining me today on the Intentional Encouragement podcast.
Thanks, Brian.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through His Word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional